I want to say, this is a shout out, Claire Smith and Martin Wobst have been really specific about where they want to see archaeology turn, right? And the types of things that they see as constituting social justice. So they're obviously not the only ones talking about archaeology and social justice. There's like a swell of people, but I want to give them a shout out because they deserve a shout out. All right, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into the idea of social justice, partly because it's not so defined very often, and partly because it is attacked, right? The idea of social justice is attacked constantly by the people who are threatened by social movements towards equality, right? So I think it's important, if we're going to talk about archaeology and social justice, we actually want to know what we're talking about. So here's philosophy speak. David Johnston, who is at Columbia, the political philosopher, you can read this, it's very philosophy speak, right? The idea of a set of principles from which we may work out an ideally just distribution of rights and privileges, burdens and pains, which can be deployed to assess a society's institutions as a whole, and to argue for a transformation of those institutions if they are found wanting, is the idea of social justice. Well, dang, okay. That's complicated, but here's exploding it out, right? These are really important assumptions to make. First, that there are principles of justice. That's important to agree upon. Second, that we have the ability to assess a society according to those principles. And third, it assumes that we must improve our society to meet those ideal principles. Those are important. And just to make sure that, it's not just philosophers, and some of you might know the work of John Rawls, right, really famously sort of in the early 70s, famous for proposing social justice and how we get to that structurally. But people all over the world, but certainly here in America with our high ideals, we're talking about social justice with or without philosophers talking about it. So this is just, I like this because it's John Ryan in 1945, important reformer at the time, one of FDR's advisors, a priest, a professor, and he uses the word social justice, and that term was very familiar in the 30s. It's that form of justice which impels men, presumably not just men, to promote the common good, right? Common good is comprising the welfare of all members of society. I think this is a quintessentially American idea that continues to get repressed, and it just keeps popping up, and we are part of the popping up of it again over and over and over and making it stronger. Okay, so there's all different kinds of archaeology, all different kinds of archaeology with a social justice bent. There's always a danger in lists because lists are always incomplete, and somebody's going to say, wait a minute, what about me? So there's a space for you no matter where you are. If you are in the business of rehabilitating archaeology, and again, and you fill in the roots, right? Colonial, capitalist, androcentric, whatever you want to rehabilitate it from, there's a lot of archaeology that circles around this idea of social justice, right? Lots of archaeologists theorize and practice. They work with communities. They're civically engaged. They want to empower dissent in communities, and we have this common core. And what's in common is that archaeology of social justice seeks to right wrongs, right? And some of those wrongs are created by archaeology itself, right, in the past or the present. Some of those wrongs have roots in the past that archaeology may be able to help expose or explain or provide ways to rethink. Excuse me. So, and all the examples come to mind. They're examples of the work that all you do, folks who are participating, who put their answers in the chat books, right? Equality, our power, We've got examples from people working with indigenous archaeology. We're trying to help people reclaim archaeology from archaeologists. There's people who are anti-racist archaeologists working with descendant communities to rehabilitate the archaeologies of slavery and freedom. There's climate change archaeologists who are trying to identify adaptation strategies of ancient people who are coping with really adverse climate effects, looking for structures, looking for thoughts and recommendations. What can we do now to affect climate justice? There's a lot going on. So because we are so fragmented and because we do put ourselves in buckets, I want to suggest that one of the things that we can do is be increasingly inclusive, enlarging the tent, connecting intentionally between all of those buckets, all the buckets we're putting ourselves in. If we've got a common core and common values and common ground, let's figure that out and build, right? Build. Our critique is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And I want to draw on this amazing author, Aya de Leon. He's a poet and a novelist who is also teaches at Berkeley. But she's written a really interesting piece about perfectionism and scholars and critical theory and critical thinking. And one of the things she laments is that how much academics have sharpened our critical thinking skills so that we sit on the sidelines and we teach our students to sit on the sidelines to await perfection, right? So she says, quote, instead of a culture of shared vulnerability in building new possibilities, instead of a culture where people try and fail and celebrate the attempt, we have unwittingly created a culture where many feel inhibited by fear and inaction until and unless they are perfect. So that inspires me to stop poking so much. She wants us to generate, not just generate and create and critique in equal measure. So centering our work on making a positive change, we can embrace these bedrock values that underlie social justice. Those are equity, dignity, and compassion.